Hey there, everybody. Going to get into our next set of topics here, and we're going to go through bottling quality control. And this is kind of the things that we're going to talk about. Pre-bottling is kind of everything that you do before you start to bottle. So the thing we're going to talk about early on in this lecture is bottling from a hard goods standpoint. That's what this lecture is going to focus on. Then we're also going to go ahead and look at bottling from a winemaking standpoint, so the production side. One thing I do want to make sure I recommend is there's a great book called Taming the Screw by Tyson Stelzer, and it is probably the single best bottling book I've ever read. It has all of the things that you need to be able to bottle wine well. It may be focused on screw caps, however, the rest of the data in there remains. It remains really, really, really strong. There's you know, tables for monitoring and quality control and processes that you can set up. It's a great book, and it's easy to read too. It's not written by somebody who's trying to prove they're the smartest person in the room. They're just trying to put it together something you can understand. It's a really, really well-written book. So I want to talk about the student-made wines that we bottle at College Cellars, and this is why I think we have a particularly unique lens on the wines that we make, because we aren't a winery making kind of a single style of wine. When you're making 15% alcohol red wines that are unfiltered, your bottling processes are going to be very different from a sweet Riesling and very different from some sort of fortified wine or perhaps a Muscat. So, in a very real way, we bottle 40 different wines, which is a bit excessive in every way, shape, and form. But we have, just for example, the Barbera. Not only do we have a regular sterile filtered one, but we also have these ones that are made in amphora. It's interesting. So we have unfiltered wines all the way through to with no sulfur, all the way through to highly engineered wines like our Muscadet and L. So chemistry at bottling can be all over the place. And the thing that's important here is that when we start looking at chemistry and bottling, I'll get into this again further in our bottling lecture. When we start talking about wine style, is that the reality is that when you bottle across all these ranges, your approach to bottling are going to be totally different. So, our scholarship white or Muscadet and L is going to be very different than the way we approach the fortified. And that also plays into hard goods and your preparation in terms of timing, in terms of getting that wine into the facility. So let's just go ahead and talk about hard goods. I think this is the important thing to focus on. And what is all the stuff that you're going to require in order to be able to put that wine that you made into a bottle? And believe me, bottling is the hardest part of the winemaker's job. Making wine is really easy. Bottling it is incredibly difficult. So pre-bottling, things you need to do a year out. So if you are going to use a mobile bottling company, you pretty much need to arrange about 1 year out in order to have the truck show up on site and be completely ready to go. The other thing you'd have to do is if you do have your own line, you have to do maintenance on the line. Now, small hand lines like ours aren't terribly onerous, but do have to take them apart 2 or 3 times a year and clean them out. Make sure that all the pieces and parts are working or they overflow, which we've all been a part of. And things can happen. And so just make sure all the rubber seats are replaced, they're not cracked. And, it's also a bit mortifying when you think about bottling like our Muscat on the same line that we bottle live wines that are sparkling. So there's, using live yeast in that same line on one wine in the sparkling, and then to use that same line to bottle Muscat, which is sweet low alcohol wine that could re-ferment if there was any yeast in it, is it's kind of daunting. Just making sure those things are done. And if you do buy your own bottling line, they take up a lot of space. They are expensive, and they require a whole different skill set of mechanics to keep running. They're very, very technical machines. A winemaker is no more a watchmaker And realistically, a bottling line, you need to be a watchmaker to make it work. And if you're going to have Stelvins and you are going to do printed screw caps or printed caps, a lot of times they take about a year to uh, be printed before you can use them. So usually 8 to 12 months ahead of time. Now, 3 to 4 months out, you've got to finalize your blends, make sure they're ready to go, know your volumes, know exactly how much you're going to bottle because you've got to be able to order labels, and that takes 2 to 3 months, if not 4 months lead time. You've got to finalize your labels, and then you'll have to put them in for a certificate of label approval. They've gotten faster, but when I first started in the industry, it could take a year to get a label approval. A year to get a label approval. So, coming up with wines was always interesting because we had a wine that we went ahead and bottled, hoping we'd get the label approved, and the label was rejected because it had the word alluring. This wine has alluring notes of something, and I thought it was really funny because alluring got knocked back because it was sexually suggestive in 1996 or seven. And then I found this one in the COLA registry. And apparently things have changed a bit in terms of what they'll allow on labels. So another thing to order 3 to 4 months out is glass. So you've already got to decide not only your volumes, but how much glass you're going to need and what style you're going to get and where you're going to get it from. So ordering glass is its own animal. It's its own challenge. There are thousands of options. There are so many different companies. There are so many different people, and I think a lot of them are actually selling the same glass from different people in different boxes. And just figuring out who you're going to use and how much you're going to need, and the cost can be huge. Things to look out for is you can buy bottles. They don't always come in boxes. Make sure that they're bulk or not bulk. So bulk glass, which is what we do for our muscat, then we have to buy boxes on the other side to load them up. Then sometimes if you order glass, you'll order it in bulk, and then the company will say, "Oh, we can box it up for you, no problem." And then you go, "Okay," and then you find out it's $5 a box to box up $5 a case glass, and you just double the cost of your wine. Sometimes people sneak in pallet charges, a little extra $10 here, $10 there, and then shipping. If you have to have a truck come to your winery, you're looking at a cost no matter what. So say it's $1,000 to have something shipped. Well, in the instance of our bottles that we're using for our Rosé of Grenache, we had to order those from New York and be shipped. And we had to pay $1,300 in shipping on $3,000 worth of bottles. And that is really expensive, and that adds up. But if you want to be able to run on their line with their bottles, you've got to uh, be able to work around that. So getting consistent quality glass shipped on a regular basis is hard because companies change molds, they change bottles, and you'll find that so much glass ends up in the landfill every year simply because it isn't used because people changed a mold and you can't get that glass anymore. And you'll have 40 cases of something laying around that you're never going to bottle. And so you just end up throwing it away because nobody wants it. And it's fairly inexpensive. So it's always a challenge for me with glass. I do struggle with it. It's one of the bigger challenges that we deal with every year. So things to do 2 months out. Make sure you've got your labels ordered. And you might want to make sure they get there a little bit early because much like our Sauvignon Blanc issue, we had the labels come the day before we bottled, and lo and behold, they forgot to print our Sauvignon Blanc labels. Well, you got the truck there, you've got a decision you make. You either go ahead and bottle it without the foil on it, or you bottle it into shiners and then handle it a second time, which is expensive. And I just didn't think that was going to be something I wanted to deal with. So we went ahead and labeled it up. So other things to worry about is the size of your bottle. Make sure that your label matches the size of the bottle. It fits on the bottle. It sounds really simple, but all these things are important to do. The direction of your rewind on your labels must match your labeler. So there's different ways to rewind labels. So the one that we do in particular is outward facing number 2 rewind, but they can be on the inside of the label or outside. And make sure that they're all the right way. One winery I know in town didn't specify, they put them on the wrong way, And so one of my students figured out how to go get a weed whacker, and they mounted the labeler on a one roll on a weed whacker, and spun them back in the other way so that they could get them loaded on the truck. And I thought that was absolutely ingenious. And before you have those labels ordered, make sure you get proofs and go over them really well, or else things can happen. And these are true typos. I love them from back in the day. Math, Tudor. I love how they spelled Mississippi wrong. School spelled wrong. My favorite one is this one. This is actually from it was in Colorado. But plus spacious, 1,550 square foot home with large lot, family room, and fireplace. Huge dick for entertaining and enjoying the views. I can't get enough of that. But anyway, make sure you proofread your labels. One of my dad was a printer for years, and he had a guy that worked for the Department of Public Affairs. And my dad had been printing a card for him for years. And the guy handed the card to a sign designer to build the sign for his office. And it wasn't until they hung the sign up above the guy's office that they noticed that for 10 years they'd been printing the Department of Public Affairs without the L in it. Write that down, figure it out. It's funny. So, bottling line, buy your own. Here's some advantages. You can bottle when you want. You don't have to have everything lined up when the truck shows up. Sauvignon Blanc labels show up wrong. Oops, you wait and bottle another day. It's fine. You have a lot of complete quality control. Your case per cost can be low if your volume is large enough. Your only volume limit is size. Now, in our hand bottling line, which I'll do a unit on hand bottling, it is pretty challenging to bottle more than a few hundred cases in a day. 200 cases is about the limit to do well and with one crew. And so, whereas with the truck, we easily bottled 1,000 cases the other day, and we were out by 2 o'clock. Very different game. And on those big trucks, when they are really running and you start early and run late, you can do 2,000 cases in a day on a truck. But like the high-speed lines at Precept, they can bottle 5,000 bottles or 5,000 cases like an hour. And so there are some pretty impressive lines, but they're obviously very expensive, and you'd have to keep running them 24/7 to pay them off. The downside is they're expensive. Even a little hand bottling line is going to set you back $25,000 just to get it going. Whereas on the bigger end of the spectrum, you might be looking at $500,000, $600,000, $1 million for some of these bigger lines. I think the one that they put in up at Winery Production Services is like $4 or $5 million. And so that's a wine production facility that's going to be doing a whole lot of bottling to justify that cost. The downside to these things is there's a lot of maintenance. There's a large footprint. It takes up a lot of room, and you're going to need a bottling line mechanic. You can't do this. There might be a handful of you in the class that are good tinkerers and you know how to make things work, and you just have some natural mechanic skills. But the reality is it requires very trained people. All right. Talk about using mobile bottlers. There's some advantages. You don't have to do the maintenance. Somebody else does. You've got somebody on the truck that's an expert at running that line. And usually they can do multiple closures. We can only do screw cap or crown seal at the school, but there are now some trucks that do not only crown seal, but they also do screw cap, and they'll do cork closure as well. Nice side is there's no extra space taking. You don't have to build huge square footage. You can shift sterility because you can make sure they're the ones doing the sterilizing. They also do QC checks, so they're checking the torques on your screw caps. They're checking all of the things that are necessary in order to make sure that you do a really good job on your wine being bottled, and all you have to really worry about is the product getting to the truck and off the truck. The downside is you're going to add $3 to $5 a case for your cost. You got to schedule it a year out. You have to have everything lined up. You must have all of your label approvals, all your labels printed. You have to have your bottles. You have to have your corks. You have to have your screw caps. You have to have absolutely everything in place. And in addition to having all your wine chemistry perfect, have it filtered, have it lasered in so that it's all ready to go. And then there's a limited volume that you can do. You're going to have to do work orders and make sure that everything is ready to go so that when the truck shows up, it knows what to expect, because it's got to know what diameter bottles, it's got to know what kind of change parts it's going to need. It's going to have to follow some logical flow to help that truck worker make sure that your wines get bottled well. So all that advanced preparation is kind of daunting. I am not joking you. My blood pressure is usually 5 to 10 points higher the week leading up to bottling than it is the week after. And then, of course, you've got contracts. And I'm just going to kind of flip through this pretty quick. And you guys can do that. And you can go through this quick too. But just go ahead and flip through this just to see all of the things that go with the contract. I'm not going to read it all to you. All right. Now I want you to stop at bottling work order. So we'll have a little talk here. Um, so this is the big piece, is after you get through all of those recitals and contracts and everything else that you have to sign. And obviously that's a little bit older contract. Theirs is all now online and very snazzy. But I just figured I'd leave it in here from the old form so you can read it. It hasn't changed a whole lot. But when you do bottle, this is one of the things that we have to generate is a bottling work order. This is what you uh, worked up to the other day. And when we did the bottling just, a few weeks ago, you go through this and you take a look at, okay, here's all the things I need to have. So realize that each line represents a whole lot of things. So let's just take the vignette, for example. So we knew that we had to have an alcohol number. We knew we needed to have about 30 parts free sulfur dioxide for this wine. It needed to be cross-flow filtered. We needed to make sure that it was protein stable, cold stable. And then those are just and then we had low dissolved oxygen going into bottles. So we had to measure all those things and make sure that was ready to go. And that's just the wine chemistry. Then you have to know you've got bottles. You got to have the right number of bottles. You got to know their diameter. And then you've got to know your starting volume. Like how much wine do you need to start bottling in order to get 50 cases? So for us, the way we did things this year is we would filter that volume. But this becomes tricky, man. It sounds so silly and simple. But say all of a sudden at the last minute, a student group wanted to blend in a little bit of something, and they did, 50 liters, shift, or blended 10% or otherwise into it. That's 5 or 6 cases you're suddenly off. The next thing you know, you got a bunch of shiners. If you decide to bottle them, or do you just dump the wine down the drain? And that's a really tricky thing to deal with. And finally, here's how much it costs, and then how much you do depending on how much more labeling. There's an additional cost added to these things. And again, this is dated. It may be a little bit different now. And then also the different services, and then the mistakes, and if you screw up, and every changeover, everything adds up pretty quick. So the more prepared you are, the better off you are. Again, general requirements, how the wine must be conditioned. You also have to have 7 people. So you're going to be paying labor, people to come and bottle wine. And then finally, you've got to have really clean water ready for them at the site. One other thing to think about too that I don't have on here is that you also have to have enough power at your facility to be able to run one of their trucks, or you'll need to run a generator. So we fortunately have a 480 volt hookup outside that has enough juice that we can use for our forklift charger. But in order for us to be able to bottle, they can hook into that. But one year, the power was down and we couldn't hook in. And so I had to go to Sun Rentals and rent a generator for them to run the bottling truck. So it is always a challenge. So make sure you've got enough juice to be able to bring a truck in if that's the case, because they do require a lot of power to run their steamers. So in review, whenever you're bottling, set yourself a timeline. You've got goals and things that you have to accomplish. So first off, how much wine are you going to bottle? Talk to the marketing department. How are you going to bottle? What are you going to do? Are you going to bottle on your own line? Or are you going to bottle on another line? Do you have your compliance in place? Do you have all your colas in place? Do you have all the alcohols right on the label? Is everything legal? And then finally, you get to hard goods, the bottles, the labels, the closures. And finally, you got to make sure that work order is perfect going to the bottling company. Or if you're going to do it in house, it still has to be perfect because you're going to have to track that so your staff knows what they're doing when they're bottling.